Good afternoon. My name's Bokushu. And at some point, sitting with you today, the phrase, America, love it or leave it, popped into my head. And I don't quite know why. But then it occurred to me, if someone were to say that to me, to say and reply, fair enough, but what is love? What is leave? And what is it? And I hope that my talk will revolve around that proposition a bit. So I think we're all very aware that this country right now is suffering from two very grave illnesses. One's quite new, it's called COVID-19, and the other is very old, and it's called racism. And these two diseases are being intensified. I'm just hearing outside, probably you can't hear it, but I'm hearing a rally cheering somewhere off in the distance. I just want to acknowledge it. The diseases that I just mentioned are being intensified by three factors. And I think they're very pertinent to Zen practice. The factors are denial. That's the first one. Denying the gravity or existence of a problem because it's not a convenient situation for those in charge. The second intensifying factor is that the inability to listen, the inability to pay attention, or even to follow basic instructions to support a common purpose. And the third factor is a lack of recognition of that common purpose. This adversarial relationship that many people have between themselves and what we might call society, or between themselves and certain elements or aspects or expressions within that society. So there's this pushing away and separation. And Zen training really addresses all of these deficits. I would call these social deficits. It addresses denial of reality. It addresses the inability to listen, to pay attention, or to follow instructions. And it most particularly addresses the habit that many have, and I'll include myself, and we'll get to that, the habit that many have of separating from what they don't like in service of what they believe themselves to be, that this is what they have to build up and protect, and that separating and pushing away what they don't like is a way of doing that. So let's take the two diseases in turn. And the first, of course, is COVID-19. And Trump says, we've made every decision correctly. And he says, now the trajectory is great. And we've got 1,000 people dying every day in this country of COVID-19, give or take, sometimes it's 800, sometimes it's over 1,000. And we're, between 20 and 30,000 new cases every day. But the trajectory is great. And he wants a rally. Tens of thousands of people in an enclosed environment with no social distancing and no masks. Terrific. More victims. There's been tens of thousands of needless deaths already. So what's a few more 10,000 or 20,000 deaths on top of those? This is really the definition of denial. There's something going on that does not support the image that he wants to project of everything's great because he's in charge. And so it's about denying what's happening and hoping that it just goes away on its own. Like he said a few months ago, well, in April, it'll just magically disappear. If only. I really wish that that had happened. I'm sure all of you wish it had too, but it didn't. It's a long time already past April, and this thing is just getting started. So the longer that people deny it, the worse it's going to get. And I don't mean to pick just on Trump. You know, we've got plenty of examples right here in New York. I walk around my neighborhood every day, trying not to go insane from being cooped up most of the time. And I see a lot of people out on the street collecting in front of bars and restaurants that have windows that allow them to serve customers. And there are many of them, I would say the vast majority of them, not wearing masks and not social distancing. So this isn't just something that happens in whatever you consider Trumplandia to be, some distant place where those people ignore the truth. This is a very basic human tendency of wanting to push away disagreeable facts through denial. And Zen Buddhism is, if nothing else, in my opinion, about reality. The reality that expresses itself through each of us. We are each an expression of that reality. And I would say that we must serve reality, but we are, in fact, reality. And every time we sit on the cushion and look inside, that is just a basic acknowledgement of reality. So we are uniquely equipped for this place and time. We have the skill, the discipline to say, yes, I will wear one. I will keep my distance for the benefit of all beings. I will not ignore. I will not deny. I will not downplay, trivialize, dismiss reality. Because that is putting down, trivializing, and dismissing me, this thing. There's no separation. And we have to keep sitting again and again and again to really get that in our nervous system, to get that in our bodies. So there is, of course, also the element of not being able to pay attention or follow basic instructions. And so you see a lot of people who are wearing masks, but not really. So they're not covering the nose, or they're under the chin. And then some people turn them into yarmulkes, very creative. They wear them as earrings. There are many styles of not wearing masks correctly. There's only one way to wear a mask, and that is to cover all of this. And to keep it covered and to not touch what's covering. And we, again, in Zen, learn to pay attention and to follow instructions. If we were able to have our retreat as we were hoping to in real physical space instead of a virtual space, we'd all have jobs. We'd all be required to work. We'd all be in a collective effort, paying attention to the minutest aspects of what we were doing. It's tremendous training to do that, to learn the value and dignity of work of the most basic and elementary kind. So we are well equipped for this time and this place and this catastrophe. But there are other places where it's not being taken so seriously. So for example, the governor of Arkansas has said, Americans are on the move and they can't be tied down and they can't be restrained. sounds very romantic, very Old West. Since when does paying attention to other people and their needs, protecting ourselves and our society, being tied down, being restrained, when were we ever not tied down? When were we ever not restrained by the need to protect ourselves and others? Is this something new? To me, it's unfathomable. A total abdication of responsibility in the face of an epidemic. I just want to mention in this context, Dogen and his commentary on the first great precept, which is to not kill. And he said that the Buddha seed grows in accordance with not taking life. Transmit the life of Buddha's wisdom and do not kill. Well, right now, non-killing is, and again and again and again and again, as unpleasant as it might seem, as unnatural as it might seem, as infuriating as it might seem that others aren't joining in this necessary work of protecting self and others, we must continue this work. We must continue to set this example. So then there's a second disease. And quite honestly, this one's much, much harder for me to talk about. But that's why I'm talking about it. And that disease, of course, is racism. Our president, many feel, is not perhaps the best equipped to deal with a racial crisis. In fact, one might say, this is not everyone's position. It's not the Village Zendo's position, but I'll say for myself that I feel he is inciting and sustaining racial violence. And he's doing that first and foremost through denial. So again, what are the aggravating factors of these diseases? Denying that there is a problem. He and his employee of the month, William Barr, our national law enforcement leader, loved the bad apples theory. Have you heard the bad apples theory? That there's this glorious tree and there are a lot of apples on it, and just a few of them are bad, but the rest of them are terrific. You've never seen such wonderful apples before. We have the best apples. Tremendous apples. But there's a few that are bad. And if we just get rid of those, it'll all be okay. Of course, what are these bad apples? Where are they? They're never specified. We never hear about who they are. They're just some theoretical bad apples that make the rest of it okay. What I don't understand is, well, how do these things keep happening if there's just a few bad apples? How do people keep getting killed for no infraction or minor infractions when there are just a few bad apples? Could it be that there are conditions inherent in the way that things are being done that lead to these outcomes, and that these apples are far from being isolated instances, but that they're part of a huge system that needs to be completely examined again, refashioned to serve and protect everyone? So the powers that be deny the reality of racial oppression, discrimination, and economic, if not physical, actual segregation. Denial of the racist rhetoric that's being used to deny the problem. Not listening to the victims maybe victims isn't the best word, okay? Choose your own word for people who have suffered oppression. I'll go with victims for now. I don't have words for what they've gone through. Not talking to these people who have suffered. Seeing themselves as being separate from the problem. So again, all these aggravating factors are making a terrible situation much worse. And I will not commit their error and separate myself from the problem, because this, see this? Those of you who are listening, you can't see I'm holding up my arm and pointing to my skin. This is a sign of privilege. This is part of the problem, the way that this is seen, the way it's treated, the way the authorities deal with it. And I have to be aware of that and acknowledge that as a first step to ending racism. It doesn't mean that I have to engage in my own personal favorite habit of beating myself over the head with what a terrible person I am and how I'm part of an oppressive system, which is partly true, but I don't have to do this, beat myself over the head with it. But I've got to acknowledge that this is the problem and the solution, this thing that covers me and influences perceptions wherever I go. No matter my personal desire, no matter my politics, this counts for much more than I would like it to. And I've got to start to dismantle that by acknowledging how much this counts for. From my birth to the present, I've benefited from a racist society. I grew up in one of the most integrated, Freudian slip, one of the most segregated cities in America. Even on a subconscious level, I would like to absolve myself, but I won't let myself do that. My skin color has conferred many advantages on me over my lifetime. Access to better schools, better health care, better jobs, better neighborhoods, at least as many define better to be. And I think it's indefensible to deny this, to deny my privilege. And it won't change just because I go out and protest against racist politicians or write checks. In a very real way, when I go out and join marches, I'm protesting myself. I'm protesting Bokushu. And all his privileges, unearned and never requested either. So just to bring this into the real world a little bit, I look out on a group of brownstones from my apartment, and one of these brownstones has a deck. And I've noticed over time, glancing outside, that this deck is frequently populated by very lanky and beautiful people. But recently, they were not there anymore. And the deck was in very poor repair. It looked a mess. And one day, I happened to glance out, and there were 3 African-American men tearing it up and repairing it. So they pulled up all the old boards. They took away all the dead stuff, cleaned up the mess, and made it really quite a beautiful job. So you have to think about the fact that they traveled, because they don't live here. Odds are they don't live here. And they traveled on public transit to get here, most likely, and exposed themselves to the risk of that. And as they were working together, one wore a mask all the time and two didn't. So these are 3 African-American gentlemen, and 2 wore masks kind of here or here, and the other wore his mask over his mouth and nose all the time. And I didn't watch these guys very carefully. I just kind of noted from time to time what was happening. And at a certain point, as they were working, a white woman came out on the deck. And it was so interesting to watch how, at that time, they all had their masks on. And the way they moved and interacted, I couldn't hear a word of what was being said. I was much too far away. But their whole way of moving, their whole way of acting was different because Boss Lady was there. And Boss Lady inevitably was white. And I can't imagine that Boss Lady wasn't very aware that she was white and they were not. And I can't imagine that any of these people were not aware that just the night before, 6 police cars had been burned to a crisp within 4 blocks of that location. All of this going on under the surface, all of this ferment. And meanwhile, there's this calm interaction about building a deck. And as I walk around this very privileged neighborhood that I inhabit, it's called Greenwich Village, the stores are manned. Manned is the best word I can come up with. There are men and women. The stores are manned by people of color. And the patrons are mostly white. And it's really the same thing, you know, the people of color working in the stores, just the night before, 6 police cars burned to a crisp. Everybody just going around like it's no big deal. We've got to keep going. We've got to keep the system moving. We've got to keep buying and selling. There's an element of tragedy in how the system keeps going with this going on. It's almost unbearable, I find. How is it for you to go into your local store and to look at the power relations? So, what makes a difference? What makes a real difference is to look honestly and openly at exactly what's here. At this, to not turn away from the truth of this. And when I say this, of course, I mean each of you. Look honestly and often. And as a reminder to myself, if no one else, with compassion. Not condemning, not chastising, not blaming, because that just makes the problem worse. But unrelentingly and compassionately looking at what's right here. And as we do that, there's something very marvelous that happens. And the thing that happens is what's here, this body, as I conceive it to be, this separate thing that I walk around thinking is so important and has to be built up and protected, disappears. Bit by bit, every day, a little of it disappears. And in that, there's a wonderful form of freedom that cannot be expressed. The direct experience of the self dropping away is the most precious thing that our zazen can deliver to us. And it may not happen during zazen. It may happen at the register when you're looking in the eyes of someone else who is in a different power zone than yourself. And suddenly it all drops away, just for a moment. And then you go back to counting your change, or picking up your bags, or whatever else is next. It's not about how liberal we are, or how conservative we are, but about how honest we are about the thing we call the self. If we try to manufacture a better self in place of the flawed self, we're just digging ourselves a deeper hole. What if we just saw ourselves fully and completely and wasted not a bit of energy condemning or clinging to ourselves? What if we gave ourselves that opportunity? Why condemn or cling to something that doesn't even exist? I am a recovering perfectionist, and this is a very imperfect world. But we seem to like it that way because it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back, at best. So I'm going to close by reading a passage from a Japanese philosopher and aesthete named Soetsu Yanagi, in which he talks about imperfection. Why should one reject the perfect in favor of the imperfect? The precise and perfect carry no overtones, admit no freedom. The perfect is static and regulated, cold and hard. We and our own human imperfections are repelled by the perfect, since everything is apparent from the start, and there is no suggestion of the infinite. Beauty must have some room, must be associated with freedom. Freedom indeed is beauty. The love of the irregular is the sign of the basic quest for freedom. Thank you.